anyone else that's here to observe or witness will be in the back. We've got spaces for delegations here. Hi, Ella. Nice to meet you. So I'm Jennifer Reddy. I'm the chair of the Student Learning and Wellbeing Committee here at the Vancouver School Board, located on the traditional unceded territories of Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh. And I thought to make that meaningful for me tonight would be to remind everyone about this awesome resource called Red Women Rising. There's a PDF copy that's free online. It's all about parents, especially women in the downtown east side, who share lived experience of living and surviving in our city. In particular, recommendation 33 in this report talks about implementing educational supports, speaking of the value of Head Start programs, school breakfast and lunch food programs, and Indigenous focused schools with Indigenous teachers, educational methodology and curriculum that is supportive to urban Indigenous students' needs and contexts. So I thought to add some purpose. So I'll do a round of introductions and then quickly review the agenda.
Rob Shadell, Associate Superintendent.
Sanji, Assistant Secretary Treasurer.
Oliver Hanson, Trustee.
Carmen Cho, Trustee and Committee Member.
Hong, ESC Rep.
Aaron Terabowski, Vancouver Elementary School Teachers Association.
Trina Galaya, Vancouver Secondary Teachers Association.
Hila Rasmussen, the mother.
And Krista, I'm here to support a delegation speaker.
My name is Andrea Glickman. I'm a parent of children and on the Strathcona PAC.
My name is Gord Lau. I'm with the TPAC.
Debbie Mohabir, QB Local 15.
Judy Sandu, Vancouver Elementary Administrators.
David Nix, Vancouver Secondary School Administrators.
Harjeet Kanguya with Operating Engineers. Janet Fraser, Trustee and Member of the Committee.
Estrelita Gonzalez, Trustee and Mother.
David Green, Secretary Treasurer.
Barb Parrott, a Trustee and Member of the Committee. Suzanne Hoffman, Superintendent of Schools. Carmen Batista, Associate Superintendent.
Jody Langlois, Associate Superintendent.
Aaron Davis, Director of Instruction.
Adrian Keogh, Director of Instruction.
Edward Silva, Director of Technology.
Sliders, Assistant Secretary.
Thanks, everyone. So we'll start with 3 delegations and then move into 1 information item and 2 discussion items with items for approval. We have none. Talk about information item requests if there are any before we adjourn. So to start, welcome, Hila. Is this your PowerPoint?
Thank you. This is not the recent version, so it's fine. I have it here. Let's just go.
Super. So just a quick point of order. We'll give you 10 minutes to present, and that's followed by question and answer from the committee members. Okay.
Yeah, so thank you so much for the invitation and the good work that is already being done in the school board. So my name is Hila. My son Ben goes to grade 11 at Eric Hamber Secondary. And based on what I saw at the school back in 2016, when I went for a random visit, my intention in this, what I saw at the cafeteria and vending machine, my intention in presenting the following points this evening is to inspire all decision makers to make changes for healthy, organic, non-GMO food and proper hydration in our school system as soon as possible. So I feel that with the information that we have today on the relationship between food, biology, health, longevity, and the costs that we know we have on our Medicare system, I believe that we can do a better job. So let's be leaders as a district. So I'm going to propose healthier, holistic possibilities for our schools, and I wonder, how can we move forward? So where do I click here? There we go. So point number 1, those are photos from what I've seen at Hamber at the vending machines. There's drinks, pop, snacks. Those, I wouldn't serve that to my son personally. We have at the cafeteria, there's muffins, sandwiches, there is a salad. sausages, burgers, I have no idea what's in them. Ice creams, why do we even sell ice creams? Where are the fresh vegetables and fruits? So, my second point is what being offered, and is it really within the Vancouver School Board guidelines? And I went and checked the guidelines, and this is an insert just for a one point there. And basically, it talks about artificial sugar that it needs to be, is restricted at elementary schools and optional for secondary schools. And I wonder why. Why, when a child goes to secondary school, all of a sudden it's optional? Who makes those decisions? Why do we even offer artificial sugar? So I have many questions. The time is restricted, so I'm just gonna quickly put up my points out there. So vending machines, why do we need them? Who profits here? Can we put healthier products in there? Point number 4, health risks to children by the food that is offered now. So just to name a few on a physical level, obesity, diabetes, food allergies, which can later all develop into high blood pressure, heart diseases, cancer, etc., mental, emotional levels, anxiety, anorexia, bulimia, depression, etc. Science shows the correlation between certain type of foods and those conditions. I wanted to show an insert from Chef Jamie Oliver that talks about teach every child about food, but it didn't fit with the time that I have here. I'll just perhaps get to that later. So in terms of inspiring and show what's possible, there are examples of what is being done in other secondary schools in the Vancouver School Board district. And there's some possibilities of healthier choices, and it can be for long-term planning, not just based on a principal term that come make decisions, then leaves, and then things shuffled about. So in general, what I would love to see is making choices within budget, fundraising, using healthy products and events, and using available grants to apply for different programs that have to do with gardening and food education, collaboration with local farmers, and with long-term vision of healthy society, which is, of course, less burden on our healthcare system in the future. And this can be incorporated in curriculum with learning opportunities about ecosystems, seed savings, GMO versus non-GMO, organic foods, variety, ways of farming, local veggies and fruits, their seasons, how they contribute to our biology and affect our body systems, and on and on and on. Wonderful learning opportunities. One organization is called Fresh Roots Farm, and it operates in Vancouver and have been running programs regarding healthy food and community gardens with Van Tech and David Thompson Secondary. I'm just going to read a little bit from the third paragraph. So after 3 years of planning, meetings with student clubs, the Green Team initiatives, partner organizations and neighborhood houses, the Thompson Secondary Market Garden was established in 2013. Over a span of 4 days by over 360 community volunteers. Today, it hosts dozens of classes across the disciplines, extracurricular opportunities, schoolyard farm tours, field trips, and team building opportunities. Neighbors gather with the school community, celebrating the simple joys, wonder, and magic of growing food. So from their principal, I would quote, student anxiety is lowered, behavior is general improved, and there is a very strong sense of mission in the students around the garden. It is a source of pride for them and a great source of communal endeavor. So this is a wonderful example that demonstrates how we can celebrate learning experiences, unity, and sharing our wealth with all, students, staff, parents, volunteers, etc., etc. Another organization is called Farm to School, and it brings healthy, local, and sustainable food into schools and provides students with hands-on learning opportunities that develop food literacy, all while strengthening the local food system and enhancing school and community connectedness. I'll read just the last paragraph from the bottom. So school and community connectedness. And this is, I see this as a key to our success and to a better future on all levels for our communities. So the most successful and sustainable farm to school activities are built upon strong relationships between schools and farmers, community members, and support organizations tapping into local knowledge, passion, skills, and resources. So yeah, eat like your life depends on it, because it does. And the bottom photo there is from an actual food served in a school cafeteria, and you can see that it's usable stainless steel, mainly fresh foods and vegetables. It looks delicious. So my summary as a parent, as an educator, as a human being on this planet, I feel that it would be very beneficial to all when the education system acknowledges that we are what we eat. As parents and educators, I see the importance of our involvement towards teaching the next generation about the connection between natural nutrient soil, organic, locally grown food, and our overall well-being. There are outer ecosystems and inner ones, and it's all connected and intertwined. In my humble opinion, it is simple. Staying passive means collaboration with big corporations and their greedy mentality. It is time to put people and planet before profit. I've decided to speak my truth here, and let me tell you, I'm super nervous. I'm not familiar with the setting with most of you. I'm kind of shaking, but I'm here to speak my truth and move forward to do whatever I can to keep raising the awareness on this matter. I'm confident that we are all for love. We all care about our children and their long-term health and well-being. It is important that we model positive interaction with the environment, farmers, and healthy food sources. At this time, with so much exposure to well-researched information, we need to work together to help the education system upgrade to a new and better standard for the good of all. So, sick care versus health care. Which will you choose? Which will we choose? And I'm coming from an artistic background. I would love to conclude with a phrase by the poet Rumi that says, "Beyond notions of wrongdoing and right doing, there is a field. I'll meet you there." And as much as it is an abstract field, energetic field, spiritual field, there is a real field on Mother Earth, on the ground. Let's go back to the root. Let's teach our children how to grow food. What can we make out of local food? Plant loving seeds and remember who we truly are.
Thanks,
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'll open this up for comments, questions from the committee members.
Thank you, Hila, for that presentation. I mean, you're speaking my language. I guess what I can say is that we are on it, and we've got a motion that's been passed that we're going to be looking to create a food vision over the next, like a 10-year vision that incorporates a lot of the principles that you've outlined, and to create an external food group. So that's coming within the district to actually lay the foundation to address things like schools and so forth. So appreciate your passion, because I understand it. It's, to me too, it's the foundation of health is actually healthy eating. we'll hear shortly from the Coalition of Healthy School Food. I do believe that's coming down the pike, as well as an actual federal program around a universal food program that could be a healthy version. But every child gets a meal every day within our school system. So thank you.
Trustee Reynolds, not Trustee Perry.
I had a wonderful friend and colleague named Sam Philippa, and he used to say he grew up poor in the Kootenays. And he said, but they never knew they were poor because they grew their own food and they always had food. They were never hungry. And that to me sort of epitomizes the importance of having food and growing your own food anyway. He always was very clear about how important it is to make sure that children are fed properly.
Just a comment. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for your presentation. We saw the picture from one cafeteria and from another cafeteria. You saw the difference. If you choose healthy, how children can eat healthy in these sites. Unfortunately, the cafeterias, there are a certain number of cafeterias that are contracted out by Vancouver School Board, and we, as a union representing workers who work in the other cafeterias which are run by Vancouver School Board, we see the difference of food being sold in those cafeterias because the cafeterias run by school board, they are following healthy guidelines. They have to follow healthy guidelines. But when you show the picture from Hamburg and there are other cafeterias, and we see them all the time, they can sell ice cream, sugary drinks, fried food, anything they want. So thank you for letting everybody know, and we see that all the time in the cafeteria. Thank you.
Just a comment from Mihila. Thank you so much for your thorough presentation. I really appreciate the links between waste reduction and health and body image and all of the aspects that are touched by healthy food and access to healthy food in schools. Trina.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Hilla. I think I sat with you in a meeting at Eric Canberra at one time when you were speaking about this, and the issues you raise are very much ones that teachers who are committed to the work of elevating the role of healthy food in our lives as is a central piece to so many people. So teachers are very much committed to this work and want to see gardening and want to see those connections be made wherever they can, and with support that can absolutely happen. Teachers are very much wanting to take on that work, but it is difficult work and it requires support. So thank you for bringing it here and very eloquently.
Yeah, and I sat in many of those meetings with Trina back at Hamburg when I was a teacher there as well. I just wanted to thank you for coming forward today, because you're doing here what we hope all of our students will do, which is find their passion and be willing to go out and fight for what they believe in. So I really commend you for being here. And I just want to let you know that I don't think you're alone in this fight at all. It's a long struggle, and I know a lot of people in this room who've been involved in that for a long time. So I think there's people here who share your passion for that. And there are pockets of things happening that are good. I was just looking through my email. We have a program at Churchill with BC Agriculture in the Classroom, which is a tremendous program of getting some fresh BC produce into our students on a monthly basis. So I totally support your goals, and just want to thank you for coming and sharing your passion today.
Thank you so much, Hila. Really appreciate your time. So we'll welcome next Samantha Gambling, Project Coordinator, BC Chapter, about the Coalition for Healthy School Food. Yes. Come on. And whenever you're ready.
Great. Hi, everybody. My name is Samantha Gambling. I'm here with two hats on. Firstly, I work for the Public Health Association of BC. I'm a community animator for Farm to School BC, so thanks for that introduction. I'm the community animator for the Vancouver Area Regional Hub. In addition, I'm the project coordinator for the BC chapter of the Coalition for Healthy School Food, and that's what we're going to be talking about here tonight.
And I'm Brent Mansfield. I'm a board member of Growing Chefs, which works actively in many Vancouver School Board schools. I'm also an elementary school teacher in Vancouver.
Great. So let's get started. Over the last 60 years, there have been many changes to Canadian food, agriculture, education, and economic systems, which have impacted a family's ability to put regular, nutritious meals on the table every day. This has led to issues accessing nutritious food, otherwise known as food insecurity, as well as to low food literacy rates. Studies show that in BC and across Canada, children and youth consume insufficient and unhealthy diets with low fruit and vegetable consumption. Insufficient and unhealthy diets has obvious impacts on a child's physical, mental, and emotional health and well-being, as well as academic performance with long-term public health implications. In UNICEF's 2017 report card, Canada ranked 37th of 41 high-income countries in providing access to nutritious food for children. While school food does not replace broader poverty reduction strategies to address food insecurity, school food programs that support healthy eating behaviors and food literacy from a young age are increasingly recognized as valuable health promotion policies in many countries. Schools are a site for effective nutrition intervention and food systems transformation. They reach large numbers of children from all socioeconomic backgrounds and at the location where children spend half of their waking hours and consume a third of their daily calories. School food programs in general have been shown to benefit student health and well-being, as well as support the broader community and the planet. For example, just to read one of these, or speak to one of these pieces, school food programs have been linked with positive impacts on children's mental health, including reductions in behavioral and emotional problems, bullying, aggression, anxiety and depression, as well as fewer visits to the school nurse. A school food program, what I mean by that, it refers to any widespread program that provides food to students at school every day, usually funded and regulated at a national level. Today, 6 of 7 G7 nations have a national school food program that's at least partially funded or regulated by the federal government. However, Canada remains one of the only industrialized nations without a school food program. There's no one way to run a school food program, so they differ in the types of foods that are served, who prepares the food, where the food comes from, how it's integrated into the curriculum and the broader school culture. And here we have 2 photos of programs, school food programs in Japan and in France. In Japan, the students come to the schools with their meal kit and they put down their placemats and their cutlery and they serve the food themselves to each other, and they learn how to serve each other, to clean up after themselves, and to they have a lot of gratitude for the food and for who prepares it. In France, they sit family style and they serve each other. In both France and Japan, the lunch period is seen as an educational period, the same as math or reading. So even though there's no national funding or regulation in Canada, that doesn't mean there aren't school food programs in Canada. In BC, 75% of school districts report having a school meal program in at least one school. These programs, however, are run at a classroom, school, or school district scale, and they rely on parents and other members of the school community to develop and fund. For example, you can see photos from Horsefly, BC on the left-hand side, New West, and Vancouver, who are providing students with healthy meals on a regular basis. And Brent can speak more to the programs here in Vancouver in a little bit. However, the current patchwork of school food programming reaches only a small percentage of our over 5 million students and does not meet the needs of hungry or undernourished students. This cannot be improved without significant investment from federal and provincial bodies. And this is where the Coalition for Healthy School Food comes in. So in response to a growing interest and need identified by Canadian families and school communities, a group of organizations from across Canada came together to form the Coalition for Healthy School Food. The coalition now has over 100 member organizations from across the country, hosted by Food Secure Canada. And these organizations are advocating for federal investment in a universal, cost-shared, healthy national school food program that will enable all students in Canada to have access to healthy meals at school every day. Here in BC, some of the member organizations include PHABC, who I work for, Fresh Roots, Growing Chefs, First Call, Vancouver Food Policy Council, and many others. So the coalition has certain qualities that they're advocating for within a school food program. And some of these guidelines include health promoting, which means that schools would ideally model the revised Canada Food Guide. And this also includes promoting healthy school food environments, which I'm happy to speak more to in the Q&A if you have questions about school food environments. Cost shared, meaning that the program would be cost shared between federal and provincial governments, municipalities, school communities, and the private sector. Universal means that all students would have the same opportunity to access a meal or snack provided in a non-stigmatizing manner. Respectful of local conditions means it's respecting local conditions, culturally appropriate and locally adapted. So school food programs might look different depending on the region or the context. Connected to community, supporting local food producers where possible, and comprehensive, meaning that food programs are integrated with the curricula through nutrition and hands-on food systems education. Where are we at now? Nationally, the coalition has made some big progress in Ottawa. So this past spring, the 2019 federal budget included a commitment to work with provinces and territories towards the creation of a national school food program. It's exciting because it's the first time that a national school food program has been mentioned in a national budget, which was later reiterated as part of the new food policy of Canada. And some of this pressure is coming from politicians and stakeholder groups here in BC. So in response, the BC chapter was recently developed just in June of this year to support national outreach and advocacy work and to develop a provincial plan for how BC would utilize funds and build on existing projects across the province. And in my role as coordinator of the BC chapter, I've been working since June to reach out to diverse stakeholders across BC, including those from education, health, and food and agriculture sectors, and to increase public awareness and support for the program. I'm going to pass it over to Brent.
Thanks, Nita. So how can the VSB actually support this work? And I returned to teaching 2 years ago, and before that, I actually had the privilege of being one of the founding members in my previous work while I was working at UBC and otherwise working with Think and Eat Green at schools. So here is the opportunity. So there's an opportunity to endorse the coalition. So you can see there's other endorsers, including the BC School Trustees Association has actually already endorsed the call for a universal cost-shared healthy school food program. That part has been done. We have the City of Vancouver up there. We're now in BC kind of beginning to mobilize and actually get school districts, other municipalities, making that call that really makes it clear to federal and provincial government. So this is something we want to see happen and to enter more into that conversation. So there's the opportunity for the school board to become an endorser. And there's a little bit more about the BC STA motion. You can see there it's not only about kind of making that formal endorsement, it's making requests of Ministry of Education, Health, Agriculture, beginning to have a lot of these conversations that are unfolding, that are already unfolding, but kind of stepping into that fray even more with the opportunity that we know this is being discussed by the federal government, and we have that kind of in the national food policy moving forward. Individually, for all of you guys here, right? I hope that the school board can endorse. There's an opportunity just to sign up to get more information on what is happening, some of the campaigns that will come out of that, opportunities to connect with your own MP and MLA and kind of engage in our BC chapter discussions. Excited to say we actually have our first meeting tomorrow and Friday, for Thursday for public, Friday for members, and I know some of you will be there. So we invite you into those conversations individually and as a school board, and really just the opportunity to share research and articles that really build the case for why this is so important. This last one just to show, and hopefully to no one in this room, the need to explain the power of food. We've heard it already tonight, and I can tell you story after story through my work at Grandview, through working with schools across the school board, with the Vancouver School Board and Think and Eat Green, and now at Lord Roberts. The power that food has to engage students in learning that is so much beyond what they would get from sitting on their own and working on a piece of paper and out in a garden and cooking food and sharing food, and the connection that has with some of the local farmers who are actually parents from my school, to that where we're actually seeing teachers and parents and all these people coming together to eat together, and just the opportunity that we have in Canada to create what we want to see around this. And I think with that, we'll stop.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for your time.
Thank you so much for your presentation. Thanks a lot. So I'll open it up to committee members for questions. Trustee Fraser and Alex.
So a question that I think on one of the slides it said there's $50 million for local projects from the federal government's budget. Is there any information about what those could look like, or
how the funds will be delivered? So I wonder if I have it in my slides. Oh, do I have access to my slides again? Thank you. There's a few different delivery models. Do I have it on here? Yeah, the 50 is different. So right now, there's no one answer to that. I think people are currently figuring out what's the best way to deliver funds, whether that would be through a federal provincial accord, or whether that would be to a federal nonprofit or to provincial nonprofits. So how that would be delivered is currently up in the air.
The 50 million that was actually on that slide specifically spoke to this 4 main pillars within the food policy that they're committed to. The 50 million was actually for a local food infrastructure fund, which there is actually applications due for right now, which links to this work, is slightly different than what you see in the budget there around. They haven't put a dollar amount yet forward, to be totally honest. The commitment that's come forward has said to have conversations with provincial and territorial governments as well as community organizations around developing.
I was going to say that there's no dollar amount.
There's no dollar amount yet from the federal government.
I'm putting two things together.
You're putting two things together. So just to tease them apart, local food infrastructure fund, which could connect to schools, right? As versus the cost shared universal school food
Which
program.
would be a total of $1.88 billion, and so asking $350 million from the federal government.
Trustee Patel?
Great, thank you. Thanks so much for coming. It's great. I mean, you've got your wealth of information, and it's obviously a very important topic. And I would encourage anyone who's really interested in food, if there's still tickets, to come tomorrow night to Vantec at 6 p.m. to come out to the coalition meeting. I'm wondering if maybe you'll be talking about this tomorrow, but in terms of data, to look at those 6 out of 7 countries that have a universal program around things like childhood diabetes, obesity. Do you have some data that could be shared at some point?
Yeah, there's a lot of research. Yeah,
There's
happy to share that.
There's tangible evidence that this works, so that therefore helping students in the classroom.
Finland, Japan, where else has there been research?
Even some stuff that's happened in Toronto around some of the funding that's happened there around behavior and truancy and things like that. We have local examples as well from Canada, but Japan, there was a recent one that came out in Japan related to obesity and school food.
Happy to share that.
Thank you.
Put myself on the list. Yeah. Do you want to go ahead? Okay, thanks. So yeah, thank you so much for your presentation. I really appreciate the call for like multiple stakeholders. I think that's something that's really important to remember, as well as the clear call for action. My question is around the links between universal access and stigmatization, and if you have some information on like how those two things interact.
Yeah, so Brent, maybe you can speak more to this, but universality is an important guiding principle within our work because students come to school hungry for many reasons. And so we're seeing hungry and undernourished students not just because of food insecurity, although that is a big factor in it, but recognizing that there's other reasons that students come to school hungry. And there's been research that's demonstrated that targeted programs can actually be harmful in terms of providing food to vulnerable or marginalized students. So it has sometimes a counter effect where providing, a program where students have to wait in another line or something reduces their likelihood to participate in that program. Yeah, it's also very costly to manage a targeted program. Do you have anything to add to that?
Trina?
Thank you so much, Chair. I just want to highlight the comments that you made around food insecurity and the notion of defining and understanding that term, also around food literacy, food system education, how to prepare, preserve, and even store food, which is not necessarily what you talked about, but also the link to growing. For many of our secondary teachers involved in home economics or culinary arts, that's very much what their focus is. But not all of our kids take those programs. So it's either creating another way to capture those kids or create space to make sure that, that they do have those opportunities to make those lifelong skills. But also I appreciate you highlighting the access to external funding to maybe help make possible some of these things that we very much say we want and we recognize that we need for ourselves and for our students and for many of us as parents too. So thank you very much for your passion and presentation. It's really great.
Anyone else? Thank you so much for your presentation. Really appreciate it. So next we'll welcome Andrea Glickman, right here, for food services.
Hello, we'll just stay in our seats here. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples, the Hookaminim speaking peoples, and of course, always acknowledging that it's a privilege to carry out our business on their territories, and especially always around education being a particularly sensitive issue to be carrying out on these unceded territories, given the historical relationship of education as a weapon of colonization. So, really holding up my hands to those local nations for allowing us to continue the work here to advance and improve education for all of our children. My name is Andrea Glickman, and I'm a parent of a grade 1 student at Strathcona Elementary and also a 3-year-old. And I'm on the PAC board at Strathcona Elementary, and I'm involved here because I'm quite passionate about food security issues, particularly when they intersect with children. And I can't be happier to follow both of those presentations because my presentation isn't going to focus on the importance of connecting food to education and thriving children, because I'm going to more focus on some consultation aspects that need to happen. But having your 2 presentations first is everything I would need to kind of make my point about why we need to have consultation, appropriate consultation done by the Vancouver School Board prior to preparing any report that's about food security, because we clearly have experts on the topic that need to be listened to and that need to be incorporated. I'm also going to say last year we became involved in the food security issues because the Strathcona PAC successfully fought for the city to restore funding for they were doing those proposed cuts, you'll remember, to the Food for School program last year. And so we found out about that, and we did successfully advocate for them to restore those funds. I understand there's some, of course, strings attached to that, temporary measures, things like that, but we are still working on it. And I would say that Strathcona PAC had a resounding support for our advocacy for the hot lunch program for the school. We haven't had a chance to have a PAC meeting since we found out that this was roughly on the agenda. So I'm here speaking as an individual parent with my experience on the PAC rather than as for the PAC, and I'm grateful to be supported by Krista Sigurdsson, who's the chair of the Strathcona PAC. Specifically, I'm here to speak about an item that's coming up on your agenda today, which is item 3.2, food services operations, which you'll see in your agenda. My concerns are that the Vancouver School Board is carrying out a review of food service operations, which obviously includes delivery of food service and really every single aspect of food service, without any engagement from the broader community, teachers or parents. I'm sure there's some stakeholders that seem to have been involved, stakeholder representatives, but there hasn't been any broad engagement. And it also looks to me that this is being led probably by wonderful people, but potentially the Secretary Treasurer. I'm thinking this is likely more from a bit of a fiscal perspective, and certainly the way that it's described in the agenda item that you have in front of you is that the district contracted chemistry consulting group to review the current state of the district's food service operations and make recommendations for future resource allocations to align with the 2021 VSB strategic plan. My concern is the manner that VSB is approaching food security is by looking first at the future resource allocation rather than looking at it from a food security perspective that's student-centered. I'm also concerned that in your briefing, your memo, it notes that district staff will present the report at tonight's meeting, the November 13th Student Learning Wellbeing Committee, which will include the recommendations from the chemistry report, and stakeholders will have the opportunity to provide additional feedback on the recommendations and the suggested timelines. Now, I happen to be the kind of dorky person that combs agendas of VSB and City of Vancouver agenda meetings. Not everyone is like that, and so I would say that there's not really the stakeholders that are described in this memo are present tonight to provide feedback on the report. I'm also going to point out again that the fact that the report's not being released until this meeting is problematic, because even the fact, I understand, and I actually, I'm grateful that you schedule presentations at the beginning because of parents having children, things like that. But it's very difficult to be responding to recommendations in a report that I actually haven't seen yet. So, I guess what I'm here for is to call upon the Vancouver School Board to reassess how they're carrying out consultation, engagement, and research around food service delivery where it impacts students and teachers. We've heard a lot from the previous presenters that students simply can't learn if they're hungry, and it's proven, and it should be a starting point for any work. And so what I guess I'm hoping to encourage the VSB to do is to shift the strategy to review food service operations to be more one that is student-centered and equity-focused, rather than something that is going to be fiscally focused. I don't think we have that option. I just don't think the students, the students aren't just numbers on a paper. And, at Strathcona Elementary, we have a lot of students from diverse economic backgrounds. A lot of students utilize our hot lunch program. A lot of students go on in high school to take advantage of culinary training opportunities that might exist in high schools. And, we need to focus on the students and keep them front and center. We can't focus on this from a business perspective. In terms of the equity lens, we know that students from that are disproportionately impacted by poverty that might be accessing hot lunch programs are going to be communities of color. They are disproportionately poorer in the city of Vancouver for sure. And so if we're not taking that kind of lens into account when we're doing an analysis of food service operations, I think we're doing a real disservice to our students. And I frankly think it's out of line with what the VSB has committed to do in terms of how it approaches and engages with students. I don't think that the VSB can accept recommendations before consultation happens. So in terms of the recommendation in the agenda that you have before you to undertake work on the district food service program, I simply don't think you can do it because there has not been the appropriate consultation. I wish I was here to talk about what food is available to the students. Like my daughter in grade 1 wants the food program expanded. She wants there to be vegetarian options. She happens to like vegetables, so she's like, want more peas. But we're not really here. And of course, I'd love all those ideas about students serving each other. But we can't even get to that point until we understand what the recommendations are being made to food service operations. And all I know is that they can't be cut or altered at all. What I'd like to see ultimately is a motion by the trustees that would recognize the importance of connecting food security to thriving children and learning outcomes, and identifying new criteria with which to approach any review of food operations. And I think that's something that is really achievable. And I think that over time, the information we have access to with respect to the importance of nutrition to students and learning, the disproportionate impact to students from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and communities of color, all that information keeps becoming more and more clear. And so, for example, the school board might not have that kind of a direction right now to staff because we simply didn't have all of the research documented. But you heard before, even when Trustee Fraser asked the question about the data, the data is all there now. The Coalition for Food Securities has all that data. And so I would really like there to be that new criteria with which to approach any review of food operations. And I'd like it to be student-centered with an equity lens and standards for consultation with the school community, which includes with teachers, with students, and takes into account the specific cultural backgrounds of the students, takes into account students with special needs. I am, of course, available to help you with your motion if you need to. And I'd like to conclude by saying that I think that you might need to commission additional reports. If you keep the report that you've got done by Chemistry Consulting, which I am going to note is also a human resource expert firm, like it's not any organization that is run by anyone with educational expertise in terms of the education system. If you're going to keep that report, you might need to commission additional reports that would round out the analysis of food operations, because I'm not getting the sense from this note that the discussion that was had by the first two presenters or myself is likely going to be included in those recommendations. So we'll have to wait and see because we don't have the report yet. But we're looking forward to coming back to future meetings, and we'll share this information with our parent community and the other school community. And we are hopeful that you will seriously consider that kind of a motion, because I think it's really timely and I think it will serve the children well going into the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So opening up for questions from the community members.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the reference to Secretary Treasurer in your presentation, the chemistry report will be released tonight. District staff have done recommendations in that. There's got to establish a food service work who also have recommendations, some of which align with the chemistry report, perhaps, and others don't. So I will say right now, tonight, though, that there have been no recommendations. Staff have made no recommendations. Any decisions on any of the recommendations. And the intent of the recommendation is in the document tonight is for the committee, this committee to do work to evaluate those recommendations, decide what it is they want to do and what they want to recommend to the Board of Education. That would then direct staff to do what the board wants us to do. So we have made no decisions about anything. And it's really, we're putting it in the hands of the committee tonight to round the recommendations and provide direction.
I have a question. Oh, go ahead.
Should I reply?
Trustee Cho. I guess there was really a question there, but we go to Trustee Cho and then I have a question.
Thank you for the chair. Thank you very much for your presentation as well, the other two groups. I just wanted to say one point to what you said about not looking at it just through a financial lens. And I think that's why it's coming to students and not to the finance. Is that the hope is that we are looking at this through the lens of students, that's best for them, as well as teachers in the broader community. So I don't know if that helps you, gives you any confidence, but that is the lens that we are all looking at it through. So I wanted to address.
Yeah, a question that I actually had is twofold. I take your point about accepting recommendations after consultation. Can you tell me a little bit about what consultation in your school context might look like, or with the knowledge of like who your kids are and people?
Well, I mean, I also think that the BSB, and I think I've said this at earlier presentations, needs to have a consultation policy that is applied consistently across the board. I think it would make it a lot easier, and I'm sure the BSB has certain obligations to different stakeholder groups, so I'm sure they would need to for sure be consulted in anything. But I think that, I mean, a policy would really make it clear, but I think the consultation process could include providing notice to parents, probably through email, and I mean, if it was a really heavy issue, also probably paper as well as sharing through social media, providing what's going to happen, like what the goal of the engagement would be on, and then providing the opportunities for engagement, probably both through meetings, through written submissions, those sorts of things, and then articulating to the parents and students and teacher community in advance what the school board would be doing with the feedback that they collect, and then articulating a process for meaningfully considering meaningfully considering the input that's received in that process before going to the stage of making recommendations. So that would be like a loose process, but I mean, I of course I would encourage you to have your own, consultation policy that's so for transparency purpose.
Questions? Thank you so much for your time. So next up, we have an information item from Jody Langlois, Associate Superintendent, on music review update.
Can I make a suggestion that we change the agenda and go straight to the food services item, because we've just had the delegations, so it might be.
Thanks for the suggestion. So folks,
Excuse me, I'm sorry, but I can't hear these questions, some of them. The audio system in this room needs to be sharply upgraded. There are any of us here at the back, I don't know. Some of the questions were very, very clear. Others were inaudible, muffled. So, you know, for a public institution, I think the senior management in this board has to look at the audio system in this room, and these presenters deserve our complete and total attention. I would like to hear the questions and the response. Some of them I simply missed out on them. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. So we will be louder in this case. Thank you so much for that feedback. So the comment was that maybe we could move up the order of the food services update before the food review update. So could I get a read from committee members in terms of feelings about that? Would that be possible to do? Sure. So the order then is, any objections to that? So the order then would be food services update, then music review update, then IB exam fees. So Jody, Lenoir, and Adrian Keel are okay to stick around. And Shazad. So, sorry. David's good. Absolutely. So just we'll wait till it's up. Sure. So while we're just waiting for the report to queue up on the PowerPoint, we will have Shazad Somji, Assistant Secretary Treasurer, and David Green, Secretary Treasurer, to lead us in the report. And this is the report on food programs that we've heard about tonight. That is a long-standing program of the Vancouver School Board. The ask here is that we focus on how we proceed with this report in a way that allows us to explore these issues. So please keep that in mind as we move through the reports from staff, and the fact that trustees have also passed a motion on the food services working group, which Trustee Gonzalez already spoke about, which also includes the 10-year vision. With that, over to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So first of all, I'd like to say that speaking what Trustee Cho mentioned earlier, just because this report is coming from the Secretary Treasurer and the Assistant Secretary Treasurer, that reflects only an organizational reality in our organization, because the people who run the food services programs report up through Shazad and myself. So this is not a financial report. It's not dealing with anything like that. So the report is simply states that, you know, reference to our strategic plan, you know, goal number one, we engage our learners through innovative teaching and learning practices, providing increased opportunities to connect students to their learning, which was obviously mentioned earlier today. Create a culture of care and shared social responsibilities, supporting collective relationships with community partners that enhance student learning and well-being, and provide effective leadership, governance, and stewardship by utilizing effectively school district resources. So, as been stated, the district did contract chemistry consulting group to review the current state of the district's food services programs and to make recommendations for future resource allocations to align with the strategic plan. We did get an initial report in 2017 that was updated in December 2018. And as I said earlier, that report's going to be released tonight. As I mentioned, we did have a food services working group formed after receipt of the chemistry report to evaluate the recommendations and to determine where the district aligned with those. The working group held three workshops with trustees in May and June of this year to review the report and its recommendations. And then the working group completed its report this past summer. We recently had a workshop of this committee of the whole, stakeholders in this committee, including all trustees, all senior management, and stakeholders in this committee, 23rd, to review the recommendations, the chemistry report, and again, gather initial feedback on the recommendations. And the feedback from that workshop is attached as Appendix A, and I hope that the committee gets an opportunity tonight to evaluate that, those recommendations from feedback from that session. all the members of this committee have received the chemistry report previously tonight. They've also received the PowerPoint that we presented at the workshop on October 23rd. So committee members are well informed of what the recommendations are, both from the chemistry report and from the food services working group. As I mentioned earlier, recommendations are presented tonight for the discussion of the committee. No decisions have been made on the implementation of any of those recommendations. We also provide in the report a proposed timeline for consultation in order to make recommendations for the board in advance of any budget considerations that might be made in the upcoming budget process. But also to, as I mentioned in the referencing to recommendation, for the board to consider what actions that they want to direct staff back to do. So it's really the work of the committee right now to take these recommendations and evaluate them, recommend direction to the board, provide direction back to staff to implement what recommendations they may want to see recommended. So, Madam Chair, that's the brief description of the report. I wanted to reiterate some of the points that were previously made. And I guess now we probably want to show the PowerPoint, which has the recommendations in that.
So what first thing that both chemistry consulting and the internal food services working group did was there were some guidelines or guiding principles that were followed when coming up with the recommendations and the review. And these were, when we took this to, you'll see on the next slide, you'll see a timeline of the process. And when we took the guiding principles to trustees when they had their workshop, prior to the workshop with the Student Learning Wellbeing Committee, these guiding principles were actually ranked in order. So the first guiding principle is remaining education focused, innovative teaching and learning opportunities. Secondly is to feed every hungry child in the Vancouver School Board. Thirdly is student and staff safety. And lastly was fiscal responsibility. These were the guiding principles that were followed and I think really affirmed by the board when we went through the workshop there. Did the same sort of activity with the committee workshop. So here's the timeline, and the Secretary Treasurer mentioned some of it was first the draft chemistry report coming through December 2017. And the final one, December 2018. Staff have had 3 workshops with trustees. May 13th, we presented the chemistry recommendations, or actually chemistry consulting team had presented the recommendations. On June 10th, staff presented the current state of food service operations to trustees. And then June 19th, food services working group recommendations were presented to the trustees in the workshop format. And then finally, October 23rd, there was a workshop with this committee, stakeholders and trustees on food service operations, presenting all that information. So when we get into the recommendations, so the chemistry report basically came up with 5 recommendations that the food services working group reviewed and looked at. And chemistry's first recommendation was to eliminate operations that are managed as a business only and do not support student learning. And this ties back to the first guiding principle, which was to remain education focused. When the working group looked at this recommendation, there was agreement that we should sort of focus on remain education focused rather than following the chemistry recommendations fully. The working group determined that thresholds should be established on some of the recommendations that the chemistry consultant. The second recommendation was transitioning hot lunch programs to delivered meals. And the group agreed with this recommendation, believing that implementing this recommendation would allow the district to feed more students, which would align with the second guiding principle. Third recommendation from chemistry revolved around teaching cafeterias and consolidating teaching cafeterias to 2 secondary schools and establishing a future center of excellence. And the working group felt that we should establish thresholds here again for the teaching cafeterias. So the district has seen a decline in the number of teaching blocks for culinary arts. I believe in 2013-14, we had about 60 blocks teaching cafeteria, and then down to 36 last school year, and down to 34 teaching blocks this school year. And the working group also agreed with the recommendation of establishing a future center of excellence. Fourth recommendation from chemistry is to develop a capital repair replacement strategy for all school kitchens. And again, the working group agreed with this recommendation, develop the strategy for all remaining school kitchens. And their last recommendation was to engage a commercial kitchen consultant and develop a strategy to implement these recommendations. And working group, again, we agreed there needs to be an implementation plan developed and likely engage a consultant to manage the equipment inventory reallocation. So those were the 5 sort of strategy or recommendations that came out of the chemistry group. Committee members have seen this before, and as Secretary Treasurer mentioned, we have a copy of the report. Once we were able to read through that, there's a lot of information in there. This slide just summarizes the working group recommendations, changing food service for teaching and non-teaching cafeterias that don't meet the thresholds, repurposing the Center Cafe, establishing the Center of Excellence, transitioning elementary hot lunch programs to delivered meals, transitioning full pay hot lunch program to delivered meals for students in need, and balancing cafeteria staffing levels to reflect the changing workflow need. And the roadmap that the working group is sort of putting to the committee as far as moving forward is to go through an engagement or public engagement process, realizing that halfway through November. We've extended the timeline from what was presented at the workshop. So having that engagement happen January, February of 2020, bringing that feedback back to the committee in April, having senior management review that input, which will also happen in April. And senior management would bring recommendations back to this committee, either in a committee format or a workshop format in May, and possibly take a recommendation to the board in June 2020. So really, this is where where the working group is looking for input from this group as far as how to proceed. As Secretary Treasurer mentioned, we haven't. There is no decision, so no further things happen besides this, and we look to seeing how we just take it back to, again, the guiding principles, which were key, which were pretty important to really stay focused on how to make some recommendations on food services for the district. Feedback.
Thanks a lot. So opening up to the committee for questions. I've got Archie and then David.
Yeah, thank you, actually. Thank you through the chair. As this committee have seen the report prior to tonight, and we have some initial response to the recommendation of the working group. And I would like to read it out if I can, in a 10-point form, and I have made copies for this committee, and I can give it to you to circulate. Yeah, thank you for this opportunity. The reason we did not mention our name in the delegation is because delegation was prior to the actual report recommendations coming out. So that's why just initial response. I would like to read it out quickly. And if there's any questions that I'll be happy to answer that. The 10 things wrong with Vancouver School Board Management's plan to cut the culinary arts program, cafeteria, and food for students in need. Number 1. The food servicing working group plan created by VSB management only and presented today represent the most serious loss of educational opportunities for Vancouver students we have ever seen. Planned drastic cuts to the culinary arts program would mean tens of thousands of Vancouver students in the years ahead would lose any chance of participating and learning skills from Red Seal chefs for a trade that can last a lifetime. The closure of the non-teaching VSB operated cafeterias would put long-time workers out of a job and deprive students of healthy, nutritious meals in their schools and leaving them to a nearby fast food outlets. Privatization and contracting out of the extremely important breakfast and lunch programs would end hot meals in schools, and the delivery model would stigmatize kids receiving those cold meals at these schools. The management plan would also eliminate and privatize VSB site production kitchens, where many students learn from VSB chefs and staff, and they prepare meals for the students. Number 2, the proposed cuts to the culinary arts program come at a time when the BC Restaurant Food Services and Hospitality industry estimates it currently needs 20,000 skilled workers by 2021 and thousands more after that. And that labor shortage is so desperate it seeks workers in foreign countries to meet the need. Number 3, our union has been working cooperatively with the BC Restaurant and Food Service Association, which strongly supports the need to increase enrollment in the culinary arts program and expand it, not cut it. Currently and astonishingly, the VSB has no teaching cafeteria west of Oak Street in Vancouver. These changes would make a bad situation far worse for even more students, for even more students in the mind. Not only do culinary arts program students gain invaluable training in kitchen, restaurant, and food service, many go on to make a good living in the industry. Students with special needs particularly benefit from the culinary arts program, which teaches them the kind of basic of food service that allow them to get jobs in fast food and other restaurants, often their first jobs, giving them income, independence, and self-worth of being employed. The food service working group members consist entirely of VSB managers and did not seek any input from Vancouver School Board's key stakeholders, not from students, parents, teachers, culinary arts program chefs, nor any of the VSB unions who represent those teachers and staff. This is solely a management plan. Our union's reasonable attempts to gain basic information about the culinary arts program and cafeteria operations to improve the program have been completely rejected by VSB management, to the degree we are now appealing freedom of information requests made to the VSB that have been refused. The food service working group admits that VSB management have no capital replacement or maintenance plan for either teaching or non-teaching cafeterias, which has resulted in a now urgent need for extensive equipment replacement that is unbudgeted. Existing private cafeterias in some VSB schools would continue to be subsidized by taxpayers while not following guidelines for food and beverage sales in BC schools for healthy nutrition, guidelines that VSB operated cafeterias must follow. That means sugary drinks, deep fried food, bottled water, and other products will continue to be sold for profit and against the guidelines that VSB is supposed to uphold. Our union recently completed a local bargaining with the VSB and ratified a new collective agreement. Yet during that entire process, VSB management and its bargaining team never once ever mentioned the possibility of significant job cuts to our bargaining unit and substantial changes to job descriptions. As a result, we will pursue a bad faith bargaining complaint to the BC Labor Relations Board to protect those members' jobs if this plan is implemented. In conclusion, the Food Working Group management plan lacks any vision for a better system, instead proposing punishing cuts and a dramatic reduction in student opportunities. It was developed intentionally in a complete vacuum without input from students, parents, teachers, staff, or the food service industry and public. It recommends fundamental and negative changes that would deprive students of learning and employment through culinary arts program training that can last a lifetime. It would put out of work dozens of valued employees at the same time. It ignores completely its own VSB Commission reports of 2012 and 2016 that recommended positive changes to improve cafeterias and student learning. We urge VSB trustees to reject this unacceptable report entirely, to work cooperatively with students and parents, with our union, teachers, other staff, the restaurant and food service industry to find creative and collaborative ways to expand, not contract the culinary arts program to improve our cafeterias, not close them, and to feed more hungry students with better food, not fewer with worse food. Thank you.
And I'll go here to David, and then I have Gord on my list. Thank you, Regina.
Sure, I just wanted to speak on behalf of the recommendation that calls for some consultation in January and February. I think that a lot of what I'm hearing tonight, and certainly what I see in schools, is that students and families and staff are all very passionate about the quality of food and the availability of food to students. And I think that, you know, what we've been presented tonight is some recommendations that people have had a chance to look at. And has been said a couple of times, there's no push for any action right now other than a process, which I would fully support. And I think having those consultations is a great way for us to begin that process.
Gord?
Sure, I guess I do have a couple of comments just with regards to this report, and also kind of touches on some of the delegations that presented earlier. Obviously, we've had quite a number of parents comment to us with concerns about food quality as received in the schools. So, I mean, one thing we'd love to see is healthier options available for our children. One concern that we would have with regards to changing what we have now, or is, there are concerns that there are more options these days, especially at the secondary level. And we already hear concerns about students ordering food from offsite. We are just a little bit concerned that if any changes need to be made, I mean, there are a lot of things to consider, including reaching our goals of being the greenest city. So, for example, additional garbage, additional miles traveled, and so on. So those would be some of our concerns with regards to any changes. And importantly, touching on something that we've heard earlier with regards to consultation, we hope that affected community, parents would like to be consulted, and not just the stakeholder groups, but also more broadly through the community. I think that's an important thing, and just it'd be nice to also include students in that consultation, so especially since they're most directly impacted. With regards to opportunities for teaching, I just have to come back to your statement with regards to the culinary programs and the location. It seems like it would be a shame. I mean, there's already some geographic inequity in access to the program, and reducing the number of locations could exacerbate that geographic equity. I mean, that the ability to access those programs. I guess some of my, now, those are just statements of concern. I guess one of my questions would be, have any other, when the stakeholders that viewed the report, saw there was desperate need for a capital investment to keep things going, have any other options been considered, such as long-term leases? That's an actual question.
So the question is about whether or not other options for whether other options, including capital leases for upgrades, have been considered.
That's right.
Just revocalizing it for folks that might have. Thanks.
To the chair, we haven't, there's an annual budget in place in cafeterias. It's about $200,000. We haven't had any conversations about, whether you'd be placed by increasing that budget, to place equipment in schools. That might be something the committee would recommend for a budget consideration. Whether it's a, outright purchase of capital equipment or whether it's a lease of equipment, the lease of capital equipment like that would probably be a capital lease, so it would have to be accounted for as capital anyway, and we would pay like a financing charge over and above, the actual cost of the equipment. We haven't made those decisions yet. But I wanted you to know we do have a budget already, $200,000.
Thank you.
Board, and I'm going to Darren.
Great. Yeah, thank you, Harjeet, for a really thorough response, and to the delegations for some really aspirational ideas about what we could do with our food programs. If I can, just to add a few things, Vesta is also concerned about trustees making decisions that result in the contracting out of work by unionized workers at the VSB. I also want to note that in 2018, trustees made inquiries in Committee 4 in September into being a living wage employer. And if that is still an objective, we believe that contracting out work won't move the VSB towards that goal. We are also concerned about accessibility for students to programs. Closing teaching cafeterias means that students who wish to participate in culinary arts programs would have to make a decision to leave their community and travel across the city to access these programs.
Trina and then Trustee Cho.
Thank you, Chair. I have a number of comments that I want to make, and I just actually want to just back up a little bit to the working group and the recommendations, just the way that it was presented to us tonight, and just be clear that those of us, the stakeholders that were involved in the conversations, were involved in a meaningful conversation, but it was very late in the process. So the recommendations that we see, I want it to be very clear that Vancouver secondary teachers certainly did not give a sense of endorsation to what has been perceived as recommendations around moving forward. I am happy to hear that there is a lot of talk that will continue and discussion and consultation that will continue, but we were involved late in that process, as quite frankly, all stakeholders were. And much of that work started with trustees beforehand. So I think that's important just to be clear. We also are talking about programs, particularly the culinary arts programs, where it has been framed that only 10% or only 10% of our students is actually a very sizable number of students, and to alter or change or look to eliminate culinary arts programs actually has a profound number of students comparatively to other decisions the board has had to make and the trustees have had to make around keeping schools open or not. Closing those programs would impact just as many, if not much more, many more students. I also wanted to just touch base on sort of the notion, the aspirational pieces, as Darren talked about with our guest speakers tonight. And I think that what they described was very inspiring, exciting, and hopeful. and again, is exactly the kind of work that we know is happening in our schools, in our culinary arts programs, in our home ec classrooms at the secondary level. And I quite frankly believe it's what we want. So it really isn't a time in our opinion, from Vancouver secondary teachers, that we should be contemplating removing them or decreasing them. In fact, if we are going to achieve these hopes and aspirations that have been set out through conversation, through the inviting of delegates, through giving space, then it's the very opposite. We need to create more spaces for these meaningful learning opportunities that impact students for the rest of their life. And Harjeet, thank you very much for your succinct report, because we are looking for many more skilled workers, not fewer. And of course, that's not just in the food industry, but in other parts of skilled labor. And so it really is a difficult question that I think that these trustees really need to take a closer look at if we're creating decreasing the opportunities for these skills to be developed, opposed to actually improving them through supports and ultimately funding. So I know in the October 23rd meeting, I also raised the reality that our school board is in a very difficult position financially. I mean, ultimately, this whole system is funded on $1,800 fewer dollars per average per student brought to our systems than nationally speaking. So our BC students and ultimately our Vancouver kids are far funded have far fewer dollars that are supporting their systems. And we are seeing this play out here in programs that we know that are good for kids and good for learning. So and then just maybe to come back to the international sort of perspective that I know has been raised through our guest speakers tonight, but also in the working group, we had some really good conversations around this hopeful and aspirational, what could food look like and how could students experience food. And I would have to say, if you look at Japan or France, I am curious, I don't have the stats, but I would be very curious to know what is the GDP that they are spending and investing in their school system, but more directly in their food system within that. And is it the same or is it less? And perhaps that is also what is enabling them to have such truly impressive and really hopeful goals that we can aspire to. So I think that's all I had to say at this time, and I look forward to further opportunities to discuss this.
Thank you, Trina. So definitely welcoming committee members to think about the process moving forward as well. So thinking specifically about feedback and also what next. So I'm coming to Trustee Cho, and then I've got a couple questions myself.
Thank you, through the chair. I actually have a couple questions. I'll just ask one and then go around, and you'll come back to me. You want just ask one? I have a couple questions, so just ask one and then you'll come back to me.
Sure.
Okay. So my first question is just about point number 9 that you raised, Harjeet, about existing private cafeterias not having to follow the food guidelines. And I don't know if you can answer this or somebody else, but I'm just wondering, why do we not ask those people to follow the food guidelines? Because it does seem to create an inequity in the system if we're asking some to follow and some to not. So I'm just wondering, is that something that we could implement, is to have the existing private cafeterias follow the food guidelines as our other cafeterias do?
Something probably over there, somebody to probably answer that question.
To the chair, perhaps I could have a conversation with Harjeet after the meeting to get a bit more details about that. I think I'm aware of some instances where that may speak to that tonight. I'd like to have something more specific, provide feedback to the committee.
Do you want me to come back? Super. So I just have a question. Come to you, Trustee Baird. So one of my questions was around sort of, we understand what's sparking some of the updates to the report. I'm just wondering if we could hear a little bit about like the method or process of updating the report. So there was the food service working group. Was there anything else in terms of context that would help understand what methods went into updating the report?
Madam Chair, what do you mean by updating the report?
Yes, so in the report, it said the 2017 report was picked up again in 2018 and updated.
Yeah, Chair, it really was the report was just updated for data really. But by the time we got it in 2017, some of the data was already outdated. So, kids getting meals and that sort of thing. So we had to pay for that. And some basically, I guess, the editorial. The content was essentially the same.
Thanks so much. Yeah, just trying to get a sense of the consultative opportunities in there. And I have a second question, but I'll come back.
I don't have questions, so I'll ask your question first.
Well, I think Trustee Cho also. Anyone else before we go around for seconds?
Great, thank you through the chair. My other question or comment maybe is about point number 3 in Harjeet's memo, where you talk about strongly supporting the need to increase enrollment. Yet in the report, we did hear about how blocks have declined over time. So I guess the one thing I would say is, or ask is, do you have any suggestions about how to increase enrollment? And secondly, I think this might be one of the areas that consultation could really help us, because I think by talking to students, we would really have a better understanding of, are they choosing these programs? If they aren't, why not? And what is the need versus what we're currently providing? So that's my one comment on that. But if you have any comments about that, I would love to hear them.
Yeah, thank you, Trustee Cho, through the chair. The one example that I can give that that the enrollment went quite down in the year 2018, I believe, because we had a recruitment retention issue in one of the cafeterias. The cafeteria had 8 teaching blocks, 7 to 8 teaching blocks that one year, and next year they had 0. So it's not like students, there were 7 or 8 blocks one year, there were 0 students signed up, because there was a teaching position, a teacher retired who was there for a long time, and then the position was posted as point some like 7-8%. It wasn't a full-time job posted, so no qualified teacher chose to take that part-time position. So due to that, those classes were dissolved. Basically, they were not offered. So that's how like big number can just drop from one year. Just that was one reason. Another reason, as we know, like there's no teaching programs in west of Oak Street, and so like we have some cafeterias, they can offer teaching programs. Churchill's one of them. They have the equipment, they have the kitchen, they have the staff, qualified TQ staff, but there's no programs. Those programs haven't been offered for years at that school. Killarney is another one, and now Templeton is a third one. So we are already putting barriers to students in some schools. They cannot take these programs, and that's why they're further declining in the enrollment. I hope that.
Follow up to that, then, do we know that at those schools where they no longer are doing that, that students are wanting the like, are they asking to have the program and it just doesn't exist anymore? Or do we have that information?
Sorry, through the chair, Templeton's definitely, we heard from different parents. We heard from actually the staff who works at that cafeteria. The students would like to take the programs because those programs were not offered. Other two, we haven't offered for years. So if we won't know until we actually have the opportunities for the students to sign on. So, and we have, made our submissions to the boards going back a lot of years back to turn more cafeteria into teaching programs.
So, can I jump in? Anyone else? So I have a question as well, just in terms of, we're hearing a lot of questions around like delivered meals, by whom, universality, feeding more kids. I'm wondering, in light of some of these questions that are coming out, which is kind of the purpose of this, to talk about how we move forward with the information in front of us, is it possible, will the report, the PowerPoint and the report be made available for folks to dig in before anything else happens?
Madam Chair, the report will be released tonight. Damage report and the PowerPoint.
Trustee Parrott?
Well, Chair, I think consultation is a fine idea, particularly people, parents and students. I do though, in the spirit of being open and upfront, I do want to mention 3 major concerns that I have. And the first one is the hot lunch program. I've experienced benefits of a hot lunch program in much of my teaching, and in all likelihood, it's the only hot food that some students receive, and I believe that the hotness of the lunch is also part of the benefits that are accrued from having that lunch. My second concern is one of the way we respect our employees. And I think that we haven't done a very fine, we haven't done, in my opinion, behavior that would be something of which I was proud in the way we have treated some of our employees impacted by this work. And thirdly, is the I'm a coologist. That means a person who studies winning the coup. And I try really hard in all my undertakings to not be Eeyore. And I think that if we weren't looking at the food services in an Eeyore-ish sort of way, but we were looking at it in a vision that was brought into attention by our delegates tonight, that would have that would be very impactful, because I think it would excite our students, but let's consult them and see for sure. It would incite our students to become involved in food programs because of the interconnectedness to everything. Like we're having climate strikes. We're having them because we're destroying our planet. And here's one way for us to make the planet better. It's not cutting gas emissions, but it's certainly looking after the planet and its people on it. And imagine that as being part of the vision that we have about food services in Vancouver. And so the report doesn't start from that spot. It doesn't, I think, in my opinion, it doesn't start from the vision of what our food service should encompass. It starts with what we have now and the problems that we're experiencing with some of that, and how do we fix those problems. I would rather the report start from the pooish side of things. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Parrott. Any other committee members? I've got Arjit for a second time.
Yeah, okay. Just actually going back to Trustee Cho's question, and that she asked about the cafeterias not following food guidelines that are set by VSB. Through the chair to Secretary Treasurer, one parent showed us one picture from one cafeteria, and if you go to any cafeteria that is contracted out, because they're all run by the same catering company, you will see the same picture in every cafeteria that is run by the privatized company, and you will not find ice cream, sugary drinks being sold in any of the VSB run cafeteria, because they're managed by Vancouver School District, and they are following the guideline that's set by the VSB. Just example, our cafeterias, they used to be very fiscally responsible, doing things the way they used to take on extra tasks, not just for preparing foods to serve students. They used to prepare a lot of catering jobs, which used to be at the school level, like there would be for their staff meeting, their articulation meetings. So our cafeterias used to get big catering orders, but 4 years ago, food services put a ban on any catering done by the staff. So put them in a position where they cannot make more revenue for that cafeteria. And then then we have to put more money into those cafeterias because they weren't making as much money. So I just want to give that picture as well, because our cafeterias, some of them used to be making way more money, way beyond their own budget, like what their own expense, like at Center was one of the cafeterias, and Windermere, Vantac, there were a few cafeterias, they used to make a lot more revenue. But then, because then we went on to, you can only prepare things in the cafeteria that are student learning based. You cannot do catering. As you don't worry about the revenue. You're there to teach the kids. But now it's coming back and haunting them that you're not making enough money. So that was another perspective. I just wanted to trustees to have that.
Any other folks? Comments? One piece that I wanted to add and kind of bring into view was a motion that was passed around the food framework, brought forward by Trustee Gonzalez and unanimously approved by the board. And I see that there's a role to connect some of the dots here. So based on some of the things we're hearing, concerns for waste, wanting to be able to feed more hungry kids, thinking about universality, access to learning opportunities, all in conjunction with that, noting the importance of moving forward with kids in consultation, the location of programs, contracts for both delivering food, preparing food, and serving food, and then the spirit of growth and access within the context of funding and other infrastructure issues that we've heard. So I'd like to suggest a recommendation based on what I'm hearing from the committee, if that's okay to throw this out there. So the recommendation of the committee would be that the board undertake 2 consultations, including kids, parents, educators. The first consultation could contribute to the food framework and 10-year vision motion and inform trustees' vision of the future of PSP programs, including universal hot lunch and breakfast programs, public versus private food supply, delivery, preparation, and access to training and education in food. The second consultation would take place after the visioning process and would inform the development of further recommendations. Maybe we could get that on the screen. I know it's a mouthful, but I'm just trying to bring all of our sentiments together. It's a mess.
My motion would actually, I think, usually said that we can make it after.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's the point that I want to, I understand. But it's clearly about, you know, and like, it's through. I know, we're all on record. That's like what our role is.
At some point, if they don't want to. I'm not there. So. It's also.
Thanks. Yeah, and so just in presenting this, not to wordsmith it, but to capture some of the feedback of the committee, knowing that the ask of the report was to come up with a process with this committee. So. That up, so I'm coming to Dave.
So I was just going to speak to sort of the student participation in the consultation process, because I think particularly, I don't want to diminish elementary school students at all, but particularly at the secondary level, the behavior of how those students are choosing to exercise their food choices is making a huge impact on all of this. And I think it's super important that we hear that student voice before, you know, making final decisions. But I know, like, if it's a consultation process where kids are going to come forward as a delegation and make a presentation, you're not necessarily going to get a reflection of the VSB students as a whole. And so like I said, I really support this consultation process. I would like to see, particularly with the student and maybe even with the parent piece, that maybe something that we send out through schools, soliciting feedback in writing from students or from parents that we could then push forward, so that you're not only hearing from families or students that are able to come to a meeting like this to have their voices heard.
Thank you, David. I got trustee Parrott. Trustee Cho.
In response to that, I was hoping that we could involve the Vancouver District Student Council in developing a format for seeking input from the students in the schools.
Thank you, trustee Parrott. I've got trustee Cho.
Thank you through the chair. I think my biggest concern here, and maybe it's just that I'm not clear, is I don't like the idea of somehow combining the food framework motion with this. I just feel like they're interconnected, but the work of the motion around the food framework was separate from this. And I just think they are two different things, and I'd like to see them pursued separately.
Trustee Cho, any comments? I've got trustee Gonzalez. Did you want to comment on that?
Yes, I sort of
Sure, and
related to
I'll come
that.
to you,
So, and part of the 10-year vision was also that directed by an external work. So I kind of agree with that too. I mean, this process was going, the reason the motion stated to have it actually, the work after this consultation process with the chemistry report was so that we had some direction from that report and staff and consultation to help inform the overall vision of what we're trying. So it's definitely a part of it, but it would come after the fact. I think it also needs to be led by this external working group that's made up of subject matter experts in food security, food production, parents, stakeholders, but it's outside the realm of VSB operations and having help to define what that vision is, all the moving that you allude to in those bullet points there. And it may require a little bit more to get this process, but the process we're talking about, that vision as well, because it's going to be dependent on what you decide to do on facilities.
Trustee Gonzalez, so just some comments around separating the approved framework motion from the consultant's report and recommendations that we're discussing tonight in terms of process. And I'm coming to Harjeet.
Yeah, actually, I was going to say exactly saying what Trustee Cho said earlier, because we had this motion that came from Trustee Gonzalez in September. I think that was a motion started by the previous board by Trustee Alexander, I believe. So like we were also confused when we saw that motion. Then there was a meeting set up in October, thinking that is going to be something we are following that. But then coming to that meeting, then we were briefed in the morning of that day that was it is coming from a different report, that a chemistry 2017 or 2018 reports. And again, I think it has to be a separate consultation, even if especially on the 10-year food framework motion, because that captures a lot of other elements of where our food comes from, where we grow and teach kids, healthy eating and a lot more of that. So just going back to, sorry, I lost my train of thought. I was gonna say, you know what, I have to come back. I had my train of thought and I just lost it.
Okay, thanks. So some comments around separating, anyone that wants to give a different perspective to that? Let's start there. Yep, Secretary Treasurer Green.
So, second consultation meant to deal with the chemistry and food. That's the second consultation?
Yes, so I think what this would lead to is a review of those recommendations after the consideration of consultative input from folks mentioned above.
Yes, I got my train of thought now. So, I mean, obviously, we are definitely already heard me that we are not definitely, we are urging trustees not to even go any direction with the recommendations that came from the working group that was created by a chemistry report. Because if we are doing consultation on food work framework, like a long-term vision, there were other reports. They were done by Vancouver School Board. In 2012, there was a chemistry report was done in 2012. There was a Kathleen Ponsard report that was done in 2016 by the Vancouver School Board. And there was very good recommendation on those reports that were never implemented by this board. And I think, I'm not sure if trustees, now they probably have the reports, but we should maybe include those reports that were done when we are talking about not singling out one report that was just came out recently.
Thank you, Harjeet. So just a couple of ideas that I'm going to throw out based on what we're hearing. So we're definitely wanting to separate the food framework. Yeah, I'd love to hear other comments, Trustee Perry. Yeah.
Well, I think in effect, there are two separate consultations here. But the first consultation, what we do first is we create our vision including the 10-year vision motion, because that's information. But through consultation, we create our vision of what food programs should look like. And then when we have that vision, we look at the recommendations of the report along with maybe other reports, I don't know. We look at those through the lens of what we want our food programs to look like. And if these recommendations help us get towards that vision, then great. If they don't, then perhaps we shouldn't be doing them. That's my thinking on it.
Thanks, Trustee Parrott. So just to recap then, again, so we are separating the 10-year vision in terms of having a consultation exclusively for that visioning process, recognizing it's a longer range of planning, whereas the second consultation is more about recommendations moving forward on the vision of food programs here and now, which is the context of this meeting. Okay, so can we try to cut that first part down then? The first consultation would inform trustees' vision of the future of the food program? I think so. If the committee's not comfortable, then yeah. Thanks. Sure.
Would contribute would trustees, yes.
Just to acknowledge the separation of the 10-year. Sorry. Yeah. Oh, yes, so please. Thanks, sorry, clear my memory. So it would go from the first consultation and then jump right to within trustees' vision. Thank you. Just to see it. Thank you. Okay. So is this an adequate way to capture feedback from this committee and proceed with something of this nature? Reggie?
Yeah, I just wanted to say with student, parents, educators, and all stakeholders, we should add all stakeholders.
Sure. All stakeholders? Referring to the stakeholders we've been.
Yes.
Okay. Is this comfortable for folks in terms of a consensus to bring this forward? Final comments? Got Trustee Friesen?
So I think, we have the 4 trustees on the committee who will take this to the board. So I think it's important that we capture what stakeholders, representatives like to see come out of this committee. I think in a general sense, where we're heading is that we have a consultation about the vision, and then the board passes the vision and maybe the guiding principles and some of the high level pieces. And then we go into process to knowing the vision and guiding principles. How do we get from where we are now that framework. And I think that the wording here captures that. But I really, as a trustee, I want, I know Harjit's spoken to this as a representative, but I would like to hear from other representatives of whether this captures what you would like the board to consider.
Thanks, Trustee Fraser. Trina?
Maybe just the timeline around the consultation process, maybe if that could be discussed a little bit, because as you move further along in the process, the consultation, if it is open, could shape and change entirely where you want to go as a board. So my question is just around the consultation process with students, parents, and stakeholders. Educators are certainly in that group, so we could just take off "and educators" because we're certainly in stakeholders. As far as an edit in the motion. But my question is just around that timeline. What do we anticipate? Is that possible to reply to that at this time?
Yeah, thanks so much for the question. Since part of it is a motion that's already been passed, and then this would complement that or come after, what's a realistic time frame, staff perspective? Trustee Gonzalez?
So logically, in terms of sequence, and this, with some consultations, and could then go to this new external working group. And then that flush out the sort of hows.
So that this process could potentially be completed by June 2020. That would then feed into the, this process would complete by June 2020, and that process would feed into the food framework that was already passed. Okay, any other comments on that timeline? Does that sort of help answer?
Yeah, and maybe just for clarification, moving forward, if we are a working group, then it is different than the working group that was referred to. And I attempted to address that earlier in my statement, but that work of the past is different than sort of a bit more of an inclusive group that involves stakeholders moving forward. So I guess that would just be my expectation around the working group, that it isn't about the work that has already been done that happened last summer or with the trustees at that time.
Okay, so Trina, just to kind of recap and paraphrase, make sure we have it. So that the consultations would include students, parents, stakeholders from the get-go. So as we proceed on any of these conversations, that it is inclusive of. And recognizing also, David, your point around different access points for different types of students, knowing they are favorites. Okay.
I don't mean to be picky, and I don't want anything to happen to this, but I have a question about what are stakeholders if we're starting to take out educators, because I agree they're stakeholders. I think parents are stakeholders. I think students are stakeholders. I don't think there is a difference between stakeholders. I think there are representatives of stakeholders right here. And students are represented, parents are represented, practically everybody's represented. Stakeholders are represented here. So that, that's my understanding of stakeholders. So, including undertake 2 consultations with stakeholders, with all stakeholders. Or list them, students, parents, educators.
So I've got Trustee Fraser, then Gord, and then hopefully we can start to come to some consensus here.
Quite often we say VSB stakeholders and the public. That captures everything.
I think just a point that I wanted to make, sorry, Gord, just on that possible change, was that hearing from folks so far was the importance of kids who use programs, and so just not wanting to lose the explicit invitation to include those groups. So I think that I would prefer to keep some explicit mention of students and parents if educators are inclusive of stakeholders. And then go.
I like the explicit mention of parents as well, because sometimes it's a stakeholder group. Sometimes our reach is among all the parents is a little limited. It's nicer to specify that we have to go out to them as a mass.
Great, thank you. So I'm just going to add the June 2020 piece here, undertake 2 consultations by June 2020. Okay. So thank you, Shazad and David. Oh, yeah, so
Sorry, just.
David, last thoughts?
Well, just with the last, not to be picky, but that last ad, I think in the original document, it talked about doing the consultations in January and February, so that there would be other things that would then come back to this group, and then there was a whole sort of timeline laid out there. And so I'm afraid if you put by June 2020, it kind of throws that timeline out of whack. I'm wondering if we could look back at that timeline slide before you stick June 2020 in there.
Thank you. Yes, mine So just as we're editing here, the suggestion is that giving staff an opportunity to take this back and rework that timeline, given the content, so that before the board meeting, when we see the motion for further discussion with our trustees, we can have a more accurate read on that. Yes? Okay. So, okay.
I think you're okay now, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So extend the June 2020.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And thank you, Shazad and David, for the presentations. No, okay. Should we close on? Okay. All right, so if folks are okay. Yes, no, sorry. So if folks are okay to move to the last 2 topics of the agenda. The first is music review update by Jody Langlois, Associate Superintendent, and Trustee Barrett.
Chairperson, I'd like to move that these 2 items be referred into the committee meeting. Student learning.
So the comment is to defer the last 2 items to the next well-being meeting, which is in December 11th, that I'm hearing from Suzanne.
I think we can defer the music program, but the IB one is time sensitive for student enrollment.
Okay, so any concerns from committee members here about tackling the IB exam fees issue, knowing that it's time sensitive, and moving music review to the next committee meeting? Actions on that? Okay. Okay, thanks, Suzanne, for the context. So IB programs, Adrian Kia, Director of Education Programs. Do you have PowerPoint or? Okay. Super. So over to Adrian. Thank you.
Thank you to the chair. So I'd like to speak tonight to, as outlined in your report, the International Baccalaureate Diploma exam fees. So the topic of fees is usually brought to this committee and subsequently with the support of the board later in the year in May or June before the start of the new school year. So we're doing family information sessions early in the new year for IB intake for the following year. So we would like to have support from the board if we're going to address the fees. So incoming families will know in January before they apply and to get accepted into the IB program the following year. So usually school fees are addressed in May or June, and parents find out in May and June any changes. But because this actually involves a district program across the city, and fees are a huge part of that program, so we want parents to know as early as possible if there's going to be change before school. So the report is for information and includes a recommendation for the board's consideration. So the IB suite of programs, we have 4 different IB programs in the city, but tonight we're just speaking about the grade 11, 12 IB diploma program. That is the only program that has individual exam fees for students. There's no official exams in the other grades or in the other programs. In the bit of the context is that we've had IB in Vancouver schools for about 35 years. There's demand every year and witness for students wanting to attend the district IB programs. We also have school-based programs. Costs to the district are above and beyond the day-to-day operating costs of regular program for students in non-district programs serve the city. So for example, we do pay the program membership fees outlined on Appendix A. We also cover non-enrolling teacher salaries for program coordination. We also compensate for some cases for smaller class sizes because students in the diploma program do not have options for other electives as per the requirements of the program. In addition, we cover operational costs allocated from the district for training, not professional development, required training for students to teach in those programs. These IB diploma programs offered at both Churchill and Britannia Secondary Schools. So Appendix A does outline the programs, so it's a short report. I trust stakeholders, committee members have had a chance to review this. So I'll read the last part of that report. District staff proposes that students in the IB diploma program at Churchill and Britannia Secondary be charged the entire fee for writing the grade 12 exams effective 2022. It is recommended that the change be shared with grade 11 and 12 students entering the program in September 22, and we start that intake process in January, as I mentioned. It is also recommended that the district create a bursary fund to ensure any students requiring financial assistance are not denied the ability to write the exam fees. So district staff are seeking direction from the board on how they wish to proceed with the IB diploma. The summary is outlined in the A. So currently, exam fees cost approximately $950 for students to write the 6 exams in grade 12, and we currently charge students $600. So we subsidize the grade 12 students in the program up to $45,000 to $50,000 per year from the district. So we're looking to address only that part of the program, not the registration fees, not the non-enrolling teacher fees, only the exam fees. So pass over to the chair and the committee for discussion or consideration.
Thank you, Adrian. So just to kind of recap the asks, so it's about IB program exam fees and recognizing potentials for savings by moving to this bursary model. And
so to the chair, so 2-part. A, of course, we will request students pay the fees, and if need be, as for all of our cases of financial hardship, that we would look to create a bigger district fund for those students for that purpose.
Thank you, Adrian. So committee for questions, I've got David, trustee Perry.
Well, so first I'd like to thank the district for the support they show this program. I obviously work at a school that has one of these programs, and I know that it's much appreciated. And I know that there's a lot of money tied up in these non-enrolling blocks and a lot of the training. I would just like to speak in favor of the motion that's put forward. Particularly, I'm happy that it's coupled with a recommendation of creating this bursary fund so that it provides equity for students who want to access the program who would be unable to pay that entire cost. And so I think it's quite well balanced and makes good sense to me.
Thank you, David, and trustee Parrott.
I'm assuming, Chair, that if students don't take these exams, they don't get recognized as completing, or do they still get recognized for completing the program, just not taking the exam?
To the chair, correct. They do not get recognized for completion of the program without the diploma. So we have a parallel, we have a certificate program in grade 11 and 12, for grade 11 and 12, so they can take one course if they choose a particular interest. They may take 1 or 2 or 3 courses and get a certificate for that one course, which may be familiar with some of the advantages, which we're not necessarily speaking to tonight. That is also available to some students.
Question here. Thank you so much for that. So I have 2 questions. One is about the number of students that are accessing this right now.
Okay. So currently we have about 25 students at Britannia in grade 12, and about 100 at Churchill in grade 12. So we're only looking at that 125 students per year, which is a pretty consistent number over the last several years. So about 125 students per year. So we are subsidizing each of those students $300 to $400 depending on the exchange every year.
Follow-up question unless others have questions. So my follow-up question, so with the switch over to bursary, does the number of students change, and if so, how?
To the chair. So we don't anticipate a change because for a number of years we have had, of course, the policy to support students in financial hardship. So we have been called upon to support students as we do. And in this case, because it may be seen as a significant change, so we would just be more cognizant of sharing that with anticipated families and students, that we do have a district coordinator, which we would look to create.
Okay, so my second or third question is just around the, so about bursaries and sort of administrative time it takes to actually administer something like that. Has that been factored into switching to a bursary model?
Sure, so we have looked at that, and based on the history of not having a high number of students requesting financial support, so currently they've been paying $600. We haven't had a high number. So we're not looking for a significant increase in staff time to manage that. No.
Last question. So my last question is just, so this is a concern that I have just around, so knowing it's like a public school entity that's offering this full cost program, does it violate School Act responsibilities of providing public programs?
Sure, no. My colleague may choose to speak to it, but so I consulted a number of districts in the metro area and beyond, and all of the districts have similar provisions in their fees. It varies differently, of course, but almost all, if not all of the metro areas do charge fees as well, not necessarily the exact same amount. We're looking at full for students to cover the entire cost of the fee.
Did you want to say?
No.
Thank you for explaining that other districts are doing this as well. So if there were a challenge, would we be concerned about legal recourse? Any other questions? Due diligence. Yep, Trustee Grayson.
I'll make a comment that this is a choice program. We do offer public education to every student in the district, and they can choose to enter the IB program if they wish to do so. From the amount of funding that goes into the IB program is quite significant. And I am, as David said, concerned about equity across the district. The funding that goes into the IB program, students in neighborhood schools. So I think it's with, and again, coupled with the bursary program, I think it's not an unreasonable ask of students going into a choice program if they are able to. And from the numbers given, I don't think it will restrict the number of students going into the program, and particularly some of these students at Britannia, I imagine might have more financial barriers.
If I may, to the chair, to Janet. So actually, the majority of students at Britannia do not live in the Britannia neighborhood. It's a district program, so 2/3 of them are actually from across the city, including in the Churchill catchment. So students may choose to go to Britannia for other reasons. Certainly, we feel that it's prohibitive to students that we've in the last number of years, and numbers of students requesting financial. Problem could exist across the city. From Britannia or also at Churchill. Students can choose because it's not a catchment. District program.
But thank you for the clarification, because in my mind I make assumptions, and I should be hopeful that that's not always the right thing to do. Always good to ask questions.
So if there are no other comments or questions, that would be it for the IB report. Thank you, Adrian. And that's it for our meeting. So we're adjourning. Oh, sorry, information items for request.
Thank you.
forward.
Yes, so the recommendation is to take the motion forward to the board meeting. Thank you, Rob. So thank you. Oh, yes, sorry, Harjeet, before we adjourn.
Right, thank you. Just a suggestion, in these committee meetings, when we get these reports, they are embargoed until certain date or time. If you can have them online prior to the start of the meeting or when the meeting is starting, same time, so people who are streaming or following at home, they can at least, they can follow the report. Like sometimes we get printed copies. In the earlier committee, finance committee, we had a enterprise risk management project with a thick report. It was we got a printed copy prior to that. So I mean, certain reports that, especially when they're lengthy reports, they need to be maybe made available prior to the meeting that everybody can follow. This suggestion.
Thank you, Harjeet, lots of detail. David Green, is that something that we can? Thank you, Harjeet. Thank you, David. Thanks, everyone. So we're adjourning at 8:57.